Hey, it's Mark Ferguson with Investor More, and this is our river house that has been involved in 2 major floods. And with all the flooding that's happened in the southeast, it's just horrible. I thought I'd make a video just talking about these floods, some things to understand with floods and living by rivers and flood zones and insurance, and maybe it can help some people out a little bit or know what to expect. Now, I did not go through the floods when I owned this house, but I did talk to the previous owners, and it almost got wiped out in the 2013 flood. So there's a 2013 flood, which was actually worse water-wise and damage-wise. But the 1976 Big Thompson flood is what is most famous because it killed 150 people. There's very little warning and just awful. So this house survived both of those. It was damaged worse in 2013. And in fact, the old owner said FEMA basically wanted to red tag the house, say it could not be rebuilt or had to be torn down. They fought them and were able to keep it. So thankfully for us, we still have this property. But it wasn't just the flood and damage to the house. It destroyed the river and the roads and took an incredibly long time for the house in the area to come back. And it still isn't all the way back. Now we are, 11 years past the most recent flood. So we're going to talk about a lot of that. We'll show you a lot more of these pictures up close and longer and talk about what we're looking at here as well. And then kind of show you some differences between floodways and flood zones, because that's important to know as well. And then if you have questions, comments, please let me know, and I'll try and answer as much as I can. So this was the 2013 flood. Basically what happened was 15 to like 20 inches of rain dropped over 6 to 7 days in the foothills of Colorado. And so it wasn't a sudden flood. It wasn't like it just came out of nowhere like a lot of these other floods in the southeast or like the 76 flood. But it had much more water, did a lot of damage, took out a number of houses, and still killed some people who weren't willing to leave or didn't leave when they were told to leave. So this is our house at the height of that flood. A neighbor took a picture of this, and the river is normally, 30 feet below where it is here. And what's crazy is it widens out too. Like there's the neighbors across the river, their land is probably 10, 15 feet lower than ours and a quarter mile wide. And so the amount of water was just incredible for this area, and very lucky. There you can see how much, that's what the river normally looks like. Just crazy how high it was. So the house did survive that, but barely. I want to talk about floodways, flood zones first, because that's very important, especially in regards to insurance. So if you're in a flood zone and you have a loan with a mortgage company, they're going to require you to have flood insurance. So insurance policies do not come with flood insurance. If you're not in a flood zone, house has never been flooded before, you won't get flood insurance. Insurance salesmen won't sell it to you because it's very, very expensive. Now, the problem with that is if you're not in a flood zone and there's a massive flood that comes along and it destroys your house, you might not be insured. It could wipe out your house and your insurance will not cover it. So if you're close to a flood zone, you're close to a river, or for some reason you think your house is in danger. All right, so I've been trying to find the right flood map for my area and found some sort of disturbing information that I didn't know was going on. This is the FEMA site. There's also another site where you can look at this information. But our house is right here, that red dot. And you can go to FEMA, type in an address, and it'll give you kind of some information. But the disturbing information here is if we zoom in here, part of our house is in this area. This area is, I believe, a floodway, but sometimes it's hard to understand these maps. So in the past, when we first bought our house, it was in no way, shape, or form in a floodway. There was a flood zone that came right up to the edge of it, and some people said it wasn't a flood zone. Then it changed a little bit. One corner might have been, but this is completely different, showing a good chunk of the house is in a floodway. Now, if we go down here, I don't know if you can see this. If I can zoom, I could zoom the map. Oh. Is that zooming for me? I feel like that's just going up. Okay. I don't know if that helped at all. Regulatory floodway is that blue and orange reddish number. And then floodways are very bad. Floodways are not good. So you have different types of flood zones, and usually they say, either a 100-year risk, a 500-year risk, and what that means is if you're in a 100-year flood zone, you're probably going to get flooded every 100 years. That's basically what it says. I mean, it could happen more than that. It could happen less, but that's what's supposed to mean. In my experience, if you're in a 100-year floodway, you've probably been flooded in my lifetime a couple times, so I don't know how accurate those are. Seems like they flood more than that in a 100-year floodway, but again, this is just from a casual observation. If you're in a 500-year floodway, you flood every 500 years. That's a lot less risky, obviously. Again, seems like those might not be accurate, because I feel like those also flood in my lifetime, just not as much as the 100-year flood zone. A floodway means it floods all the time, and it's really, really hard to get any type of flood insurance or insurance on the house at all, because from what I've always understood, and maybe this has changed recently, and this says it's effective 12/19/2006. Maybe they redid it since then. I'm not sure. This is a confusing map to me. But if you're in a floodway, what I've always understood is you can't rebuild your house if it's more than 50% damaged. So if a flood comes through, causes 50% of the house to fall down, or so much damage that it takes more than half the value to rebuild it. I'm not sure exactly who determines it. Maybe it's FEMA, and maybe that's what happened with FEMA in 2013, is they tried to say it was more than 50% damaged and they couldn't rebuild it, and the owners fought it and said it's not 50% damaged, we can save it. And so maybe I've been wrong this whole time, and it really isn't a floodway. I know we can get, but we looked at flood insurance one time, and it was like 10 to 15 grand a year to get that flood insurance. We chose not to. We could still get some FEMA insurance, because FEMA offers some flood insurance as well. It was much cheaper, but it only covers like $250,000. So we just figured, hey, we'll roll the dice for that much cost of flood insurance. If it tears the house out, a lot of the value is in the land. We can take the $250,000, put that towards building a new house somewhere else on the land that's not a floodway, because our lot goes to the bridge here and to here. So it's got 1.3 acres. So we definitely have a large chunk of land, not in the floodway, any flood zone at all. If we want to rebuild, we could rebuild out of that area. Now, some of these other lots don't have that option. So, and I didn't think they were all in a floodway either, but according to this, all of these are in a floodway and in serious danger if they were to get flooded. And I was looking at a different site 2, the Larimer County site, and it kind of seems to show, here we are, here's my house, the same thing. This green I feel like is the floodway. They don't have a legend, which you think they would have somewhere, but I was looking for that for a long time. But again, if all these are in a floodway, that basically means you can't rebuild the houses if they're completely destroyed or more than 50% destroyed. And a lot of these had water, maybe close to the first level or more. Maybe, I'm not sure exactly. In the 2013 flood, pretty much all of them were able to be saved. There was one down here in 76 that I think got washed onto this bridge. We'll show you that picture here. You may have seen it before. I think that was right here before. And then in 2013, there were houses along here that were wiped out completely. They were not allowed to rebuild. You can see the foundation on one of them. So there's a lot to think about with floods. If we go up to Cedar Grove up here, these are all lots. These are all lots along the river, and these are pretty much houses in most of these lots. All of those were completely wiped out. None of those were allowed to rebuild because they're in a floodway, and these are higher. These go up the mountain. I actually did a BPO on one of those. Even one of them up here had water almost all the way through the first floor. So you can see it completely changed the whole landscape. But this house right here managed to survive, like the lone one that survived, so they could keep it because it wasn't completely damaged. But had it been wiped out, They could not have rebuilt it. They would have had to just have a nice lot here that you could park a camper on, maybe. That's about all you could do there. So if you're very careful with flood zones, buying in flood zones, building in flood zones, and if you're using a loan, a mortgage broker, they'll tell you all these things, and they won't want to lend on a property that's in serious, harm's way, because they don't want the house to be wiped out and be left with an empty lot either, and have someone owe hundreds of thousands of dollars against it, where they can't recoup their money. So that's why they require flood insurance in certain areas. And the thing is, though, which might have happened in Asheville and some of these other areas in the southeast, right? Some of these houses up here might have gotten wiped out. And that happened in 2013, too, kind of farther down into the Greeley, Loveland area. There were houses not in flood zones that got wiped out from the floods. And you can see all the floodplains here. But if you don't have flood insurance, and let's see if we can go to Greeley and see. Whoa. Sorry, ignore that. We're just in Laramie County. We'll have to go to a different map. But anyway, let's say there's a huge flood, and your house is right here. I think it's a huge cliff, but assuming the cliff gets wiped out, the flood causes the damage, your insurance might not cover it if you don't have flood insurance. And that's what's really important to know with floods, flood insurance, flood zones, floodways. And like I said, your insurance company can help you, your lender can help you, and they can help you determine on your flood maps and different things exactly what situation your house is in, how it would work. Because from my understanding, if you have one tiny little section, like 1 foot right here in the flood zone, your whole house is considered in it. You can't just, say, it's just this one part of the house. It doesn't get insurance, the rest does. So for those people, to feel awful for the ones not in the flood zone who don't have insurance. But a lot of times FEMA will come in, they'll help rebuild houses, they'll give some loans, even grants to people in that situation to help them out. So it's not all lost. It's not, like they obviously, it's awful and horrible, but FEMA should help out a little bit, at least hopefully. I know it's a government program, they aren't always run the best, but hopefully that would help out in a situation like this where it's just a crazy situation nobody anticipated. Now this was the 1976 Big Thompson flood, the picture above, then what the house looked like when we first bought it. Again, huge flood, massive flood, but it didn't wipe out as much as the 2013 flood. It was faster, it killed more people, took people by surprise, unfortunately, but it wasn't quite the volume of water. Now this house is right across the river from ours, and found some pictures of it, which was kind of cool. It took me a long time to dig through those. This was a restaurant right next to our house as well. Those red little hotels would be right next to our property. You can see how flat and different the river is after a flood, with all the trees are gone. And then you can see the house across the river there, and you can see the wide berth of how much water is just flowing through with all the sand and debris everywhere. So you aren't just losing your property. There's the house on the bridge I talked about, but the river changes completely and the roads get taken out, which is just awful for people who are living in these areas. And it's not just the house. So if people are, oh my gosh, it's horrible, it's awful, yes, but there's a long road ahead of rebuilding the river, planting trees, planting vegetation, and then rebuilding the roads is a massive process in some of these areas because of the canyons, what is entailed of the engineering aspect of getting people back into these areas. So Estes Park is a huge tourist area, and our road, Highway 34, is the main, road that goes up to Estes. There's also a road through Lyons, Highway 36 as well. Both of them were pretty much completely destroyed, and it's very hard to get up to Estes Park for many, many years. It destroyed tourism up there, and I'm sure a lot of the towns in the southeast and these kind of mountainous areas will have, the same issues. Biltmore area was flooded awfully, and that's a huge tourist attraction. So it's not only their properties, but then a lot of people might lose their jobs or their livelihood because tourists aren't able to get into the areas. And this was just to give an idea. The flood was in 2013, and it opened fully May 24th, 2018. It took 5 years to get the road all the way open. Now, they could have done it faster, I'm sure, had they just kept it closed for 2 years and just worked on it nonstop. However, they wanted to let people get up there, so they'd work in sections, have some parts open, have people driving literally like on dirt next to the river for a while. It was pretty crazy. And then they close it for good stretches of time. So it was a tricky process to be able to rebuild. And you can see the canyons and water. It was just not easy at all. Of course, there's the weather up in Colorado, which makes it difficult during the winter. So not only do you have people losing their properties, jobs, they can't even get out or in. And you see a lot of the TikTok videos and videos of people with their roads washed out. And I saw one cool video, I mean, not cool, sort of, someone needed insulin and a drone was flying it in for them. Thank goodness we have that technology now, right? And they have the ability to contact someone and let them know, hey, I need some insulin, I need some help, because you just would be awful. You know what would happen if they can't get that. So it's a crazy situation down there, and hopefully, people can get them the help they need. We can all help in small ways as well, and I think it's something to consider with these natural disasters, not just floods. We had the Marshall Fire in Colorado that happened 3 years ago, and they're haven't even come close to rebuilding half the homes from that still. You have the fire in Maui. These are not just natural disasters that last a month and then everything's fine. It takes years and years and years to recover from them. And I think people get real excited to help and do something when it happens, but then kind of forget about it. And so hopefully they can get some help, and people can start rebuilding their lives and salvage what they can. If you're living by a river, if you're living in the mountains, unfortunately this is a risk, and hopefully you understand that risk and know that even if it hasn't flooded before, even if you think you're kind of far away from the river, if you're close to a river, you can have your house taken out, wiped away. It always surprised me seeing some of the floods in 2013 down at lower elevations, not in the mountains, where there were houses built on hills, 50, 100 feet, off the river almost. And they're fine. Water's never going to get that high. Well, the water took out the hill, right? It undermined the hill. The whole hill collapsed. The house came with it. So, if you're close to rivers, you're close to steep hills, steep drop-offs, realize there's some risk there. People will still live there. Hey, we still have a house up there too. We're willing to take on that risk, but I don't know if everybody realizes how risky it can be and what can happen if something does go wrong. So, like I said, hopefully this helps a little bit. Hopefully, FEMA can get in there. Other people can get in there. People can really help out and donate too with items, goods, money. I know all that helps as well. So if you can help, please do. If you find yourself in a situation where FEMA is saying your house needs torn down, maybe you can fight it. Maybe you don't have to just do what they say, because according to the people who we bought our house from, they were able to fight it and save the house. So maybe that's a small little piece of hope for some people. Again, not an expert on all of this. I didn't go through it personally, but just thought I'd share what we do know, our history with this property that was pretty darn close to going in and it surviving and still being there. And the government also, I'm not a huge fan of every government program. I think they can be a little restrictive, but they do serve their purpose. I think we obviously need, police, fire department, other things. I think the Forest Service can be great. They came through and rebuilt this river. They planted a ton of trees. They came through and added rocks and tried to prevent this from flooding properties in the future. They had a ton of rocks and boulders by our property. So hopefully if it does flood again, ours would be protected from those. Again, there's no guarantee though, right? If it's a bad enough flood, it could definitely get our property again. So if your property is destroyed, hopefully you can rebuild. I hope it's not an awful process. Hopefully the government can help you and rebuild it and maybe make it better than it was before. Who knows? Again, our hearts go out to those affected. Hopefully you have a speedy recovery. And it's not just those in the mountains or hills, but also in Florida, that got hit by the brunt of the hurricane. And we love the Panhandle area that got hit pretty hard down in Florida. So again, we know some people down there with properties who are struggling and down there trying to clean up. Not fun, but it comes with owning property anywhere. There's a risk, and those risks are normally far outweighed by the rewards. But sometimes awful things happen and we just have to work through them. So again, our hearts go out, hope for a speedy recovery, and maybe something in this video helps someone a little bit as far as recovering and what to look for. Or maybe it's just not for you to live close to a river like that, although many places in many areas have natural disasters that you can't always protect against.